We are live on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Underdog Fantasy and Fantrax. I'm Drew Silva. With me here is Ryan Boyer. It's Sunday, February 26th. We're going to continue our category preview series on this episode. We covered runs scored, me and Chris Crawford on Saturday, and now Ryan and I somehow got stuck with pitcher wins, which definitely feels like an antiquated stat in many ways, but it's part of the standard 5x5 fantasy baseball scoring. So it's an angle you have to consider on draft day when you're analyzing individual pitchers. We'll get into it. We'll throw our hands up in frustration and confusion with having to deal with pitcher wins along with the rest of fantasy managers out there. What's up, Ryan? First podcast here on the RotoWire airwaves. I guess tell the people who you are. I'm a bad interviewer.
Oh, you're good, man. Yeah, so I guess it's been 17 years now in the fantasy industry, something like that. I don't even know if you know this. I actually got my first job in fantasy was with RotoWire.
I did not know that.
I think it was either late 04 or I know I was working for them at 05. I was the Cardinals and Rams and actually the Blues beat writer, even though
really
I don't know anything about hockey, talking to the guy with Blues stuff in the background. But I distinctly remember I was working for them in 05 because I got to blurb, write the note, whatever, for the Pools home run off of Lidge. So that was, I'm sure that didn't sound homery at all on the RotoWire site, but
yeah, I guess we should both acknowledge at the top here that we're both pretty diehard Cardinals fans. So if the Cardinals come up in natural conversation, we apologize.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I told DJ Trainer, the personnel guy who does personnel for RotoWire, when I was first talking with him, he was able to look back in my archives to see like my first and last blurb from my first go round. And my first one was Reggie Sanders. I remember that.
Wow.
Last one was Rick Ankiel, who I know holds a special place in both mine and your hearts. So
I was going to pull up this baseball that he threw to me in Cincinnati, but it's going to cause the other baseballs to fall.
I'm still pretty upset that the Rick Ankiel that last comeback didn't come to fruition. It would have been a nice bookend to a pretty storybook.
Was that during COVID?
What's that?
Was that during COVID that he was trying, or was it before that?
And he started throwing, and his elbow started hurting again, and I think he actually had a surgery. And he was 40. Right. But yeah,
I'm gonna apologize for some audio issues too. I think Brian's computer wasn't working, so he had to get on his phone. And I think if we talk over each other, it like cuts us off. So sorry, guys. This is our first podcast together. We'll work out any issues moving forward. So after RotoWire, you worked for like a local St. Louis fantasy site.
Yeah, I went. Mike Sheets, a buddy of mine, got me on at a place called Roto Times then. It was actually started up by Nate Ravitz. He was, I think of Nate and Matthew Berry's podcast as kind of the original fantasy podcast back in the day. Nate's moved on to more administrative stuff, but he was my first boss at Roto Times, and then it turned into Fanball. Patrick Doherty, who we know, also worked with him a little bit at Fanball. Kay Adams, who's done some great stuff himself, was with Fanball for a little bit. And then you actually, kind of a friend of a friend, got me on at NBC. We were there together for 10 years, longer than that. I think I started full-time in 2010, 2011. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, and now we're here, back together again at RotoWire.
Yeah, shout out to Tim King. That's that sort of friend of friend that we have. And Yeah, I remember we were living together, and he was like, "Hey, one of my like sister's friends, is this right? Was
My
he
my wife is like best friends with his sister.
right? Okay." And he was like, is looking for like has been writing about fantasy baseball for a while and was looking for a gig. And I think it was like, was it around spring training too, when we're always trying to find people? And you were just immediately caught on. I tell people like Ryan's just the kind of guy you can just leave alone, and he's a grinder and gets the job done. So,
Hey, I'll
um,
take.
no, I'm serious, man. You're just a very good, hardworking, talented writer, and I'm glad to be working with you again. Say that again. Sorry, I think when I talk over you, it cuts you off.
I was just saying, right back at you, buddy.
Oh, thanks. Whatever. Um, I was at a wedding last night at River City Casino here in St. Louis. So shout out to a lot of shout outs on this show. Shout out to my cousin Claire. But I think the open bar got the best of me. So I'm on the water today, on the water train. What's your go-to wedding drink? And then we'll get started with this show.
So my drink, whether I'm at a wedding or out at a bar or 95% of the time it's just at home, is Tito's and water with a lemon.
Lemon wedge.
Yeah, as the great scholar Rob Gronkowski says, that vodka water works really well because you get the effects of the alcohol and you also get hydrated at the same time.
I don't know about the science behind that, Gronk.
Doctor, that's what he says. I'm going with it.
Yeah, I mixed it up last night. I remember like during the cocktail hour, I saw they had Red Bull at the bar, at the open bar, and I was like, "Oh, you guys are doing Red Bull vodkas?" He's like, "Yeah, usually not at 6 p.m., but if you want." And I was like, "Yes, I do want." So that started me down a bad path.
Yeah, the Red Bull vodka. That's a college days, I think, since I've had
I
those.
know I haven't grown up at all, but
That's
I'm doing okay. I'll make it through. We're talking pitcher wins here. That's why we're kind of just, I don't know, wandering through the wilderness. It's just, I don't know. Is there like any general strategy to the pitcher win? I don't really think so. Like, is philosophically, do you have any take on how to naturally
so.
target a pitcher win?
I mean, in general, you're looking for. We all know that wins are just so fluky, but in general, you're going to want to target guys on good teams who ideally pitch deep into games.
Yep.
And you also like don't want to. A lot of people I know like to stream to like pick up wins in the second half or whatever if they're trailing in that category. But I mean, that's gonna maybe pick up a few wins here and there, but it's gonna hurt your ERA. It's gonna hurt your WHIP, and you're gonna be using those precious roster spots that you're using for streamers, where you could, if you get an injury to your offense, you can't pick up somebody for that. If you want to.
Right.
A streamer in there, so it's just like you really don't want to put yourself in that situation if you can avoid it. So you have to have it in your mind on draft day, even as difficult as they can be to predict from day to day, week to week, season to season. It's still one of those stats that you got to have to win. So no pun intended.
Yeah, I mean, a lot like runs, and I know you listened to at least part of our show from Saturday. You're just I mean, runs and wins, like good pitchers in good situations, good hitters in good situations are generally going to get you those stats. It's not like something you can necessarily build into an outlook, but I don't know. There are guys like a Sandy Alcantara who is going to like probably lead the league in complete games and possibly shutouts. And yeah, we'll get into the guys that led that category last year and look at some potential sleepers, maybe some guys to avoid who are in not so good of situations. Big news on Sunday morning with Manny Machado signing that massive long-term extension with the Padres. My first reaction to that, maybe just being a Cardinals fan was Nolan Arenado might need a new agent. He had the opportunity to opt out of his contract back in November. I thought he was going to. I know that he really likes St. Louis, and he's just kind of glad to be out of the Rockies organization. But once those contracts started flying, like the Xander Bogaerts, Trey Turner, and then you see this Manny Machado deal. It's like he really left a lot of money on the table. Even if he wanted to stay with the Cardinals, he could have got another year tacked on at $40 million or something. They would have done that.
I wonder if that do you know if like all opt-out decisions have to be made in a certain date? Because if Arenado's was later in the offseason, I think he had to have opted out. Nobody was quite expecting the spending spree that we saw. Even at the time when he did make the decision, it seems like he definitely could have gotten more money, but absolutely he could have a month, 2 months later than that. But yeah, I'm not sure technicality wise if opt-out decisions have to be made at a certain point, however many days after the World Series or whatever. But Cardinals are fortunate that he did not opt out for sure.
It seems like it's a standard date, and I can't say with certainty because when you see guys on minor league contracts, their opt-out dates are different.
Right.
But I think maybe in a situation like this, like the MLBPA and Major League Baseball agreed that it should be 5-10 days after the World Series. It was like mid-November, wasn't it, when he had to make that decision?
5 days after the conclusion of the World Series sounds right, but I don't want to write that in stone.
Yeah, something in that range. There's not much to really analyze with Machado. I thought this was going to happen. It made a lot of sense. The Padres have thrown around a ton of money, and he's still relatively young for how long he's been around. He debuted at age 19 with the Orioles, right? So it feels like he's age 20, was it?
Something like that.
1920. So he's been around forever, but I think there's still at least 8. Well, there's still seven-ish good years left in that bat. Just how complete of a hitter he is, and how complete of a defensive player he is. He's a guy that you feel comfortable giving that kind of deal to. There've been kind of peaks and valleys in his career. Fantasy managers know that.
Yeah.
He's kind of changed. He was like he had more speed back then, but now he's more of just like an RBI machine. There was a while there where he didn't have 100 RBI season, and now he's a guy you bank on to get those, especially in that great Padres lineup that tends to roll over often. Yeah,
Peter Seidler for president. That's what I tweeted out earlier. I think I'm pronouncing that name right. Padres owner. If we could get more baseball owners like him and Steve Cohen, that would be nice.
Yep.
But
I was
when Xander Bogaerts signed with the Padres, they were kind of looking at that as possible Manny insurance if he did eventually opt out and depart. But so now kind of status quo, I guess, in San Diego. I guess it increases the chances that Tatis is going to stay in the outfield, which I think he was probably going to anyway now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for Tatis. I think he should play center field. And I know he's kind of expressed a desire to play center field. They're talking about right field, maybe both corner outfield spots. But with his skill set, his speed, his arm, I think he'd be a terrific long-term center fielder if he can stay healthy and off the PEDs.
Agreed. Yep.
What other big news do we have? Ozzie Albies revealed, was that on Sunday or on Saturday, that he had shoulder surgery over the offseason, but he's supposed to get into camp games, I guess, at first as a designated hitter, but should be able to play second base sometime this upcoming week. Yeah,
I know he was in the lineup in the DH spot Saturday. I'm not sure about today. They're saying like a week or so he'll stay in as a DH. Yeah, it's kind of at this point of mid to late February we find out about guys who have kind of nagging injuries, and surprise, I had shoulder surgery back in October. Albies is already coming off an injury-plagued season. He broke his foot, cost him a lot of time. Then he broke, or I can't remember if it was a fractured finger or like a ligament in his finger that officially ended his season. He didn't really hit very well last year either. I kind of worry a little bit that he's going to be one of those guys that, I mean, if the ball stays de-juiced, like he's never had like great exit velocity numbers. He's kind of a little bit of a compiler to a certain degree. I mean, if the ball is not as bouncy and if he, hits sixth instead of second in that Braves lineup, I think he could be a little overrated for fantasy. And this kind of throws another question mark next to him. But fine. They say it was arthroscopic, a cleanup procedure, but I mean, it's still his shoulder, so got to be a little bit of worry there.
Yeah, it was for an impingement. This isn't like a labrum tear situation, and again, he's pretty much recovered from it by now. They're just kind of easing him in. Sure. But I agree with you. I think you put it well, saying he's more of a compiler, a little bit teammate dependent. And hey, that's a great lineup. And he's gonna probably be a compiler if everyone's healthy and that lineup is rolling. Right. And he's not coming at the draft day cost that he was coming at, even a couple years ago. So you bake that in. I wouldn't be surprised if I wind up with a few shares of him along the way. Sometimes you get to a certain point in the draft and you're like, hey, there's speed here and he's in a really good lineup. And, if you're playing in a league with a middle infield spot, I don't know if that I'd want him to be my primary second baseman in a shallower league. I definitely want to have a backup plan there. But yeah, I mean, it's a knock into his outlook for 2023, I would say, but not a significant one. I think you're kind of just analyzing the player for who he is right now. Seiya Suzuki had a little bit of oblique issue. Did you say something? I feel like I cut you off.
No, I was just going to add, I mean, second base too is kind of a weak position. Yep. But just in terms of viewing Albies next to like a Jose Altuve, the other elite second baseman, I think I would put him a hair behind those guys. But I mean, he's still probably going to be fine as long as he stays healthy.
I'm looking at ADP right now. I mean, you really have to scroll. Well, it's Mookie Betts who is eligible at second base in some leagues. Marcus Semien, Jose Altuve, Jazz Chisholm, Tommy Edman, Ozzie Albies. That's at least on. That's consensus. And then Andres Jimenez, Gleyber Torres, Max Muncy. That's a position that falls off pretty quickly. But if you're playing in like a 12-team league or something, a standard sort of casual league, you can find a guy to plug in there. Seiya Suzuki had an oblique issue pop up, got scratched from the Cubs Cactus League lineup on Saturday. They were sending him for imaging. I was looking for an update. I don't think they've revealed anything. Did you see anything before we hopped on?
No, I think I probably saw the same thing as you. They're sending him today, and I believe they're expected to provide an update Monday. So we should find out more then. I mean, I guess if there's a silver lining is that this happened in late February and not mid-March, but we all know obliques can kind of nag, and 3-4 weeks is what it could cost if it's a significant strain. So hopefully we'll get good news Monday. I mean, Suzuki's a guy I like targeting this year in drafts. He got off to an awesome start last year, which is kind of atypical for guys coming over from Japan and Korea, and then just completely fell off. He got hurt. I want to say it was a finger injury or a wrist or something.
The wrist, yep.
But then eventually he was healthy again and had a really strong finish. And if you look at his StatCast page, there's a lot of red on there. I think the only thing that he really didn't excel in, other than defensive metrics, didn't really like him. But his strikeout rate was not great, but he also was like 90th percentile on chase rate. So that seems like something that would probably regress in a good way for him. So as like your third outfielder, I really like targeting him, so I'm hoping that he's not going to be out too long with this oblique thing.
Yeah, I was hyping him up on our Saturday show, like runs, and he put on 20 pounds, he said, over the off season. If that was muscle and then he strains his oblique like in the first week of spring games, I'm a little bit worried about that. But we'll wait to find out exactly what the report is. I feel like it's going to be a strain. We'll see what the severity is. And man, if that costs him much of March, maybe he gets back for like the final week of exhibition games and then is in the Cubs lineup on opening day. But I'd be a little bit worried about his ability to catch up there. But hey, this could be a situation. We've all had this experience where there's a little red tag on a guy's name when you pull up, the draft interface, and he's going to maybe come at a bit of a discount because of that, because people that aren't tracking the news like you and I do, or maybe our listeners do, they don't know that this isn't really that severe of an injury and that he should be at least playing at some point in April, if not on opening day at the end of March.
Yeah, you could definitely see him being one of those guys that sits at the top of the queue for two. I'm guessing probably a backdated IL stint. That would be my just complete speculation right now, but we'll find out more Monday. Sounds like.
All right, we'll move into the pitcher wins. We've avoided it for long enough. Let me bust out some live reads here, though. The fantasy baseball season is underway, and there's no better place to play than Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy baseball. Right now, Underdog has MLB best ball tournaments live, including the Dinger, which has $500,000 in total prizes. In best ball, all you are doing is join a contest, draft your team, and that's it. There are no waivers, no trades, and no in-season management. Draft 20 rounds of players and get the best cumulative scores in your starting lineup. 3 pitchers, 3 infielders, 3 outfielders, and 1 flex each week of the regular season. Getting started is simple. Go to underdogfantasy.com, sign up with the promo code RWMLB. That's RWMLB. And not only will Underdog double your initial deposit up to $100, but you also get 6 months of our RotoWire subscription for free. Again, that's Underdog Fantasy promo code RWMLB. Draft your 100K Dinger team today. I love those best ball things, man. That's something that it became very popular in football first, and I just love the idea of it in baseball. Set it and forget it. You feel good. You do your draft analysis, and then you just kind of track your team throughout the year. If you're looking for a place to customize your fantasy league and play a variety of formats, we cannot recommend Fantrax enough. Create the scoring systems that you want to play with. Waivers, categories, scoring systems, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all of that and more, and it's all free. I personally love Fantrax's user interface. I love running mock drafts on there or just running leagues on there. It's simple, but also filled with everything you could ever want for a customizable league. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. All right, let's get into pitcher wins. The 2022 wins leaders, we can just kind of run it down. Kyle Wright at the top, which if you weren't really paying attention last year, that might surprise you. Justin Verlander. Kyle Wright had 21. Justin Verlander had 18. Julio Urias had 17. Framber Valdez also 17. Yu Darvish 16. Tony Gonsolin 16. Alek Manoah 16. I really like him this year. Tyler Anderson 15. That was a surprise. Chris Bassett 15. When he was on the Mets. Carlos Carrasco made it to 15. That was nice to see. Luis Garcia of the Astros 15. And then Ohtani, Cal Quantrill, which is kind of a surprise. Logan Webb, and there's our boy Sandy Alcantara with 14. That's the top 15 in terms of pitcher wins last season. I don't know, anything stand out to you about that list? Kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Wright had a little bit of late helium, I feel like. He was pitching well in spring training last year, but I mean, he went undrafted in so many leagues. that gives you an idea of we're trying to tell people how to project pitcher wins, and a guy who wasn't drafted in a lot of leagues is by far the wins leader of last season. Goes to show how fluky it can be. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these names are what you expected. Verlander, of course, was amazing coming back from Tommy John surgery. Julio Urias, I believe, has a pretty wide edge over everybody over like the last 3 years in wins. He's just obviously on that Dodgers team and pitches pretty deep into games normally, but you got some surprises in there too, like you mentioned. Tyler Anderson, the Dodgers work their magic with him. Cal Quantrill kind of looks like a pretty fluky one there towards the bottom of the leaderboard, but a lot of the familiar names as well.
There isn't a ton of buzz about Tyler Anderson right now for how good he was last year. Maybe people just don't really believe it. I don't know. We'll see. The 2023 betting odds I wanted to bring up for regular season wins leaders. We can kind of comb through this. Garrett Cole is your favorite at plus 1,000. Justin Verlander is second on that list at plus 1,400. You've got Max Fried, Julio Urias, and Shane McClanahan all at plus 1,500. Framber Valdez at plus 1,600. That is kind of intriguing. Carlos Rodon at plus 1,600. Shane Bieber, Max Scherzer, Sandy Alcantara also at plus 1,600. Jacob deGrom plus 1,700 if you believe that he can stay healthy and be an ace for the Rangers. Corbin Burns plus 1,700 is pretty interesting. A bunch of guys at plus 1,800 like Kevin Gausman. That's kind of intriguing. Dylan Cease, Zach Wheeler, Logan Webb is plus 2,000. Alek Manoah plus 2,000. I just pulled this up on DraftKings too. So I know different sports books are going to be ranking these guys differently. Aaron Nola plus 2,000. Shohei Ohtani plus 2,200. Maybe the Angels push him deeper into games because he's probably going to hit free agency next winter. You see any like long shots here that would be intriguing? Robbie Ray at plus 5,000. I know he's got some problems sometimes with command that can limit how late he works in the games, but for that Mariners team, I could see him being a decent value. Spencer Strider at plus 3,000.
Yeah, I actually like both of the plus 4,000 guys. Joe Musgrove and Brandon Woodruff both at plus 4,000. I would I'd put a little taste on those. Woodruff has had his issues staying healthy at times, but I mean he's undoubtedly an ace when he is healthy. The Padres, I think, are going to be awesome. Joe Musgrove has earned that big contract last year. Plus 4,000 for those two guys. I think those would probably be my favorite two plays on the board.
Man, I'm with you on Musgrove. I mean, he's just in a perfect situation to finish with 20 wins, right? Who knows? Again, this stat is just impossible to really measure and analyze. But the situation is right, and he's a really good pitcher with really good run prevention numbers, good command, the kind of dude that you can project to have, one of the largest workloads in the majors, because there are some health concerns, I think, in that Padres rotation. So maybe he has to carry a larger load. Maybe we should head over to Illinois and combine on a little play for that if you want to.
The Padres are, I will add this, though, that it sounds like they're going to go with a 6-man rotation, at least at the beginning of the season. So he's not going to have as many chances at those wins, but, as long as he stays healthy, he's still they'll probably go back to a 5-man at some point.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think whenever I hear a 6-man rotation. Like, right. All right, we've been doing this a while. I hear that every year, and then, I mean, all right, if you have 6 healthy, productive starters, you'll go for it. Go ahead.
Be more aggressive on the base paths too. The annual spring tradition.
Yeah, he added 20 pounds of muscle. He's in the best shape of his life. Like, I'm pretty over those stories by now. We've been writing them up for the last 3 weeks or so. Ready for some real baseball to start. Chris Bassett kind of stands out to me too. I actually put a wager on him to win the league, or to lead the league in wins last year. It didn't quite work out, but he was top 10 He's the number 38 starting pitcher off the board, or in that area in consensus average draft position, pitching deep into games with solid run prevention numbers on a very loaded Blue Jays team. It's almost a better situation than what he had with the Mets. Like, man, I don't know, at plus 3,000, that's pretty intriguing. Let's dig into some names that could actually be sleepers in the win category, and some other guys to maybe avoid or that we don't necessarily love at their current ADP in terms of being able to rack up those wins. You want to take it first?
Sure. Reed Detmers is a guy I like quite a bit. He had kind of a weird 2022 season. He had that no-hitter in, I think, late May, but like all of his starts around that no-hitter were not good. Like, he really wasn't pitching well. And I think even during the no-hitter, he only had like 2 strikeouts or something. And he actually was optioned back to the minors in like late June. Then he went back to his old slider. I can't remember if he changed the grip or he maybe changed his arm slot or something, but he went back to his old slider. He was throwing it like significantly harder. And then his last 71 innings, he had a 3.04 ERA, 78 strikeouts over those 71 innings. Former top prospect, you know, the Angels rotation, you know, we mentioned the 6-man rotation that a lot of teams are talking about now. They've legitimately had a 6-man rotation for a few years now, but this year, while they're saying it's going to be still technically a 6-man rotation, Phil Nevin has said that that 6th spot is going to be more of like a swing man. So the plan is to pitch not only Ohtani, but all their regular top 5 starters on 5 days rest instead of, you know, I think Ohtani made like, he's used to making like 80% of his starts on like 6+ days rest, but now it's going to be days rest regularly, and that's what Detmers is going to have as well. You know, he built up to, I think, like 150 innings or so he should have a pretty decent workload. I think we could see him break out and provide some wins on a pretty good Angels team. I think I picked them actually to make the playoffs finally last year as one of the that didn't work out well, but actually I like what they did over the offseason. I think they could be pretty decent. Reed Detmers has some breakout potential there for a ADP outside the top 200.
Yeah, it's the first time in a while that I look at the rotation and I don't like kind of laugh, you know, like they've got some dude, Tyler Anderson, who we talked about. If he can carry over, you know, any semblance of what he was last year with the Dodgers, that's going to be pretty impressive. Ohtani, again, I think they might. It's not like they've been taking it easy with him. Like, he obviously is DHing and being an ace, you know, even if it's only every 6 days. Patrick Sandoval, not Pablo Sandoval. Jose Suarez, Detmers, as you mentioned, Tucker Davidson. We'll see what they do with that 6-man spot. I think you're right in that they could rotate a lot of guys, and they still haven't really figured out the middle infield situation. I don't know if Brandon Drury is necessarily the answer. He's had some sparks here and there, but yeah, I guess Luis Rengifo could kind of be a sneaky, you know, productive guy. I wouldn't call him a breakout candidate, but something better than what they've gotten over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly better than David Fletcher, with apologies to David Fletcher.
Yeah.
And Anderson Simmons, all their other light-hitting middle infielders they've dealt with. But, yeah, and Rengifo had the second half, he was hit over 300 and provided some surprising power, a little bit of speed. So, yeah, I kind of like that Angels club.
I was trying to bring up their win total, but I don't know what their over-under win total is. It's probably around high 7, or probably around like 80.5 or something. That's what Vegas likes to do with those kind of teams.
Yeah.
Jordan Montgomery is going to be my first, not necessarily a sleeper, but his ADP is all over the map. 127 on ESPN, 211 on CBS, 191 on Yahoo, 163 on NFBC. That tells me that like the preloaded rankings are probably all over the map on him as well. Like, because that's how a lot of people draft, just sort of following these rankings that pop up in a given draft room. That's why you should be a RotoWire subscriber. We can give you a better sense for where some of these guys should be picked. Montgomery with a full year, making half his starts at Busch Stadium, like give that to me. I know that his second month with the Cardinals was not nearly as successful as his first month, but that showing in August tells you what he can be, what he can do with that defense in that stadium, that, offense suppressing stadium and defense. Overall, a 3.11 ERA, 1.08 whip, 61 strikeouts, only 13 walks in 63 plus innings with St. Louis. He threw a shutout during his short time with the Cards. You got to figure they'll ask him to handle a pretty significant workload. There's some question marks in that rotation with Steven Matz and Jack Flaherty, and Adam Wainwright's not getting any younger, and Montgomery's scheduled to become a free agent after this season. So if you like the contract year narrative, it doesn't always work out, but it's a data point, I guess. He opened up his arsenal. I'm sure you remember this after the Yankees traded him. He's kind of just admitted that he could trust his stuff more without having to worry about those short porches at Yankee Stadium. And it's, that pitch to contact approach, getting out of the Bronx, maybe he's not going to get you a K per inning, and maybe the ERA is going to be mid, even high threes. But just win, baby. I think there's lots to like in this profile, and especially in the wins department. He's set up to rack up a good amount of wins.
Yeah, and Ollie Marmol too. I mean, I think he's the youngest manager in baseball, right? And kind of known as a guy who's into the analytics, but I feel like he lets his starters pitch pretty deep into games. I think he could do that with Montgomery, especially since as you mentioned, he's in his walk year. And Montgomery's also a guy who's his swinging strike rate has always been way better than what his actual strikeout rate is. So I think there could actually be a little more in the tank there from a strikeout perspective. I know this is a wins podcast, but that helps him obviously pitch deeper into games, and it's going to give him a better chance at wins. So yeah, I like that Montgomery call.
Who's your next sleeper, if we can call him that?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay in the same division and go with Marcus Stroman. The Cubs might not be terrible this year. They actually spent some money this offseason. That middle infield defense could be among the game's best with Dansby Swanson added to Nico Horner. And Marcus Stroman gets a ton of ground balls, so he's going to need to rely on that defense. Got off to a little bit of a slow start in his first year in Chicago, but then he has 2.71 second half ERA. Generally known as a guy who's pretty durable, pitches pretty deep into games, and like Montgomery, this could be a walk year for him as well. He actually has a player option for 2024, but if he pitches well, I don't know why he wouldn't exercise that opt-out or not pick up the player option, however you want to say it. Still relatively young. I think he's just 31, so he could still net a pretty decent sized contract. With the shift ban, generally you're kind of want to, I think, shy away from guys who don't get as many strikeouts. But as I mentioned, that middle infield defense should be really good. Eric Hosmer, I know he's the analytics say he's not a good defender, but he's a pretty solid defender, I think, at first base too. Probably Patrick Wisdom at third, maybe Christopher Morel. But good infield defense behind him. I think Marcus Stroman, pitching in what figures to be probably his walk year, is going to pitch deep into games, get a decent shot at 15 plus wins.
Yeah, and that Cubs rotation was awesome over the final 2 months of the season, but I don't know. I don't believe in some of those guys. There's some guys that I like, but they're gonna pitch Stroman as much as he wants to pitch.
Simpson?
Say that again. Yeah, Adrian Sampson and Javier Assad. I don't know. My second guy is going to be Kodai Senga, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. There's a lot of uncertainty around him naturally coming over from Japan, and also because the early reports on him out of Mets camp were less than encouraging. He was having trouble adapting to the bigger MLB baseball, the steeper slope of the MLB mound. But he's the word is that he's showing better command now. He hit 98 miles per hour in a recent live batting practice session. I believe that was on Thursday. So he's figuring out those aspects of life in Major League Baseball, and he's on a very expensive and seemingly very good Mets team, a 1.89 ERA last year in 23 starts for the SoftBank Hawks of Nippon Professional Baseball. Any taste of that, if he could bring it over to Major League Baseball, he's going to be in line for a lot of wins at a 193 ADP on Yahoo, 190 on NFBC. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty here. I'm not coming at this from an educated place more than anyone outside of the Mets organization and the people that scouted him and gave him that sizable contract. But I think that's a pretty palatable ADP for a pitcher who's in a good situation and at least showed in Japan that he can strike people out and he can pitch to a really low ERA. It's just, it's a palatable draft day price, I think, for what he could potentially be. And I don't mind getting in on that in the first year that he's over in Major League Baseball. And if you're waiting to pick 200 and his name's there, why not take a shot?
Sure. He's got that, what do they call it? The ghost fork.
That's right.
The upper 90s fastball. And I mean, this is kind of anecdotal, but I feel like being in the same rotation as Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer probably couldn't hurt. They can probably teach him a thing or two. Buck Showalter likes to give his starting pitchers some leash. I think he could pitch pretty deep into games. Like you mentioned, that Mets team should be really good. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, there's certainly an element of uncertainty, but I agree. I like the potential for some wins for Senga.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it, but I don't know what to expect. But I just feel like the situation is ripe for him to have a really successful first year. And I just think I'd be willing to take a chance on that actually coming to fruition with where he is and the numbers that he put up in Japan. All right, give me another one.
I'm gonna go with Ranger Suarez. He kind of went back and forth between starting and relieving for the first while with the Phillies. So last year was his first kind of full-time spot in the rotation. So it got off to a little bit of a slow start. I'm sure that's part of the reason why. But in the second half and the postseason combined, he had a 2.83 ERA. He's going to be built up more, I think, between the innings during the regular season and the Phillies postseason run to the pennant. He piled up like 170 innings, so he should be able to not be under any workload restrictions at all in 2023. Phillies, I think you and I both agree, are going to be really good again. Ranger Suarez, I think he's outside the top 200, 230-ish, I think, the consensus ADP between the multiple sites, but he's 15 plus wins again for him. I mean, I think that's within reach.
Yeah, man, I was looking at his ADP and kind of surprised. I figured there'd be a little bit more hype. Like it seems like he was going earlier last spring than he is right now. And of course, like you knew that there was going to be some ERA regression from what he did in 2021, but he was still plenty good.
Sure.
And he passes the eye test for me in a great situation there with the Phillies. I like that one a lot. I was looking at the Mets rotation too, and we didn't even mention Jose Quintana. I can't believe that he only went for, what was it, 2 years, 26 million this winter?
Yeah.
And I don't want to make this a Cardinals podcast, but how did they not match that or beat that?
Yeah, he kind of turned back the clock. I mean, he was good for the Pirates, but it was just took it to another level for the Cardinals down the stretch. It was their game one starter in the postseason, and went was it 5 shutout innings, 5 1/3 shutout innings.
He got pulled at 6 2/3, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was at that game. I don't want to talk about what happened at the end, but yeah, I mean, he changed up his pitch mix a little bit. And again, I think, being in that Mets rotation with those two horses at the top probably can't hurt. They can give Jose Quintana some pointers too. He's not a guy who is going to get a ton of strikeouts at this point, but I think wins definitely could be a pretty valuable category getter.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem with just focusing on wins. You can't isolate a category like this. Like, you got to think about strikeouts, but the ERA will be there at a 2.01 ERA in 62 innings down the stretch last year in St. Louis. Also, again, that brilliant turn in the wild card series against the Phillies. I went to game 2. It was not good. At least you had something to root for early on in game 1. But yeah, Quintana right now, 331 at NFBC, 302 at Fantrax, 358 at Yahoo. I get that because of the strikeout rate, but he's not a total zero in that category, and should be a big plus for wins and ERA as a locked-in starter in Queens. A very comfortable late-round starter for me in just about any draft. I'd feel very good about adding him as my 6th, 7th starter, depending on what your roster looks like. I don't know. Should we go through some quick hit guys here and then get to some avoids?
Yes, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I'll go with Aaron Savale, guy who got off to a terrible start last year. Went down with I think it was a wrist injury, and after coming back, he was just awesome. He went kind of curveball heavy. That's always been a really good pitch for him. In between, the wrist injury, and later he had a kind of a forearm issue, but when he was healthy on the mound the last 3 months, I think he had like a 3.3 something ERA. Terry Francona, who apparently you shouldn't ask him to cook your pasta for you, but he likes to let his starters go deep into games. I think Savale's had issues with the injuries as well, but if he could stay healthy on that Guardians team, it should be pretty good. I think he could be kind of a sneaky wins guy.
I like that. That's a nice play. How do you break your tooth on pasta?
I mean, I've heard of al dente, but that's to another level.
Yeah, I've heard of al dente. Brandon Pfaadt stands out to me, and Chris and I probably talked too much Diamondbacks on Saturday's show, but here's another appealing piece of what they have going on down in Arizona. Already some buzz out of camp that Pfaadt could be a candidate for the number 5 spot in the starting rotation. Maybe not to open the year. That could be a bit of a long shot, but if Ryan Nelson and or Dre Jameson have some early hiccups, I think we could see Pfaadt pretty soon. 218 strikeouts and 167 innings last season between AA and AAA. And obviously this is not a strikeouts podcast, but you love that he has already built up a workload like that. Again, 167 innings last year in the minors. So that can be, projected out to 180, 190 innings. Maybe some of that comes in the minors, but hopefully a good chunk of it's going to come at the major league level. He's 24 years old. So this isn't like a guy that they would rush to the majors at age 21. Like, he seems like he's built up for it and ready for it. I like the Diamondbacks lineup. I like parts of it, at least. I like the over on their win total at 74.5. I think Chris and I talked about this Saturday, but they can get to 80 if enough things go right. They can challenge for a wild card spot if enough things go right for them. If their young outfielders take off, I mean, they could be a really good team.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get burned by the Diamondbacks, aren't
I? No, I'm gonna agree with you. I don't know if they're gonna be if that lineup is gonna be ready to take the next step, but there's tons of talent up and down. You mentioned the outfielders. They got Gabriel Moreno as well over the offseason. Dealt from a depth position in the outfield and added a really good young catcher. So yeah, I like the fat call.
Is it fat or fat? I think it's fat.
I've heard fat.
I didn't want to call him fat.
Yeah, we should mention that it's PFAADT, so it's not but yeah, if you're searching on your fan platform.
I mean, yeah, the fact that I don't know how to say his last name and I do this for a living tells you that he's kind of an under the radar prospect. Like he has really taken off recently, and I mean, there's just glowing reports about how good he looks this spring. It's possible that he opens the season in their rotation, or that it happens, after like a couple bad starts from their 4 or 5 slot. Maybe Madison Bumgarner gets like pushed to the bullpen. Who knows? There's a lot of potential paths for Fat to get into that rotation. And then you look at the swing and miss, the command. He doesn't walk dudes. I really like his profile from a fantasy perspective, and maybe he really like emerges this year. Another one for me, Cole Irvin in Baltimore. Sort of a nice under the radar acquisition for the Orioles there. If they do indeed take another step forward this year, we're talking about teams that could really break through with those bigger ballpark dimensions at Camden Yards. Irvin could eat up some wins. Like, probably more of a streamer because the strikeouts aren't really there and they really never have been. But in deeper formats where the big strikeout pitchers dry up quickly, I think Irvin is probably worth a roster spot. And then in shallower leagues, I think he's going to be a really comfortable streamer at home games if the Orioles really get it going.
Yeah, I mean,
he's Cole Irvin. It's okay to disagree.
No, I actually agree. I was just going to say I don't like how the Orioles have they built a ballpark so they could have a gimmicky rotation. I just don't like that they can have the ability to do that. But I mean, they're getting they have a whole bunch of, other than Grayson Rodriguez, like they just have a bunch of. I kind of like Kyle Bradish too. I think he could be a little bit more than that. But
I agree. I think there's something there with Bradish.
Otherwise they just have a bunch of number 5 starters who want to pitch to contact and just try to get him to fly out to left field. And Irvin is perfect for that. He's, a lefty. The righties are going to be hitting a lot of fly balls to the warning track. His numbers at, is it Ring Central Coliseum in Oakland?
I've lost track. I just call it Oakland Coliseum now.
It's going to be not their home for too much longer probably. So we don't need to learn it at this point. But he was like crazy good in Oakland and really bad on the road. So I think at the very least, Baltimore, as weird as it sounds still to say that, is pretty much in the same boat as Oakland now as far as a pitcher's park goes. So, yeah, I mean, at the very least, times when he's going to be pitching at home, you want to stream Cole Irvin. Another guy I like, and this is kind of just trusting the Rays. The Rays gave Zach Eflin their largest free agent deal in history. A guy who I don't think ever had an ERA below like
4
something. It's just fairly underwhelming, but like some of his metrics have been just intriguing. Some of the spin rates and the Rays, like I said, I mean, at some point you got to trust a team like that they know what they're doing. I know he's already caught some buzz and early on in spring training as well with how good he has looked. He's had some, injury concerns throughout his career, and he's had knee surgery a few times, I feel like. And the Rays, like, kind of sneakily are letting their starters pitch deeper into games now. I know they're the originators of the opener and all that, but because they have a deep stable of starting pitchers now, they can let their guys kind of go. So Eflin, I think, could be a big beneficiary of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets confused by some people that like the Rays, they don't let their pitchers pitch deep. It's there was the Blake Snell situation. That was a very famous one. But that was a playoff game. Management attacks playoff games differently. We saw it with Quintana last year. If the pitchers prove capable of handling a large workload, the Rays will let them go. They let Shane McClanahan go. They might have to ease Tyler Glasnow into it, but they'll let him go once he's fully up to speed. Jeffrey Springs is a guy that I think they're going to let him pitch deep into games this year. The reason that they are the originators of a lot of things is because they have to operate that way. They don't want to operate that way. They want to operate like a traditional baseball team, but they have to get creative. And I think that rotation is filled with intriguing guys, and they see something in Eflin, and man, he's got really good command at times, and he showed really well down the stretch last year. I worry about what the workload's going to be like that. Like, what did he pitch, 70 innings last year? I guess he pitched a lot in the playoffs too, didn't he? But I worry.
So not a ton because he was in the bullpen for the playoffs.
Right, that's right. All right, let's get into some avoids. Yeah, I really like Eflin. Man, 333 ADP on Yahoo, 306 at NFBC. That's legit sleeper status. I'm glad you brought that one to the table. All right, give me some guys that you're feeling like you should avoid for pitcher wins. This is a hard thing to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah. Not straight up avoid these guys, but guys that could maybe disappoint in this category. And I feel like I'm taking the free square here with Kyle Wright after last season. 21 wins. He's I mentioned in general with the shift restrictions, right-handed, especially ground ball pitchers, they're just naturally going to be facing more left-handed batters. Left-handed batters were affected more by the shift. That's not going to be as much of the case moving forward. Kyle Wright had a 55+% ground ball rate last year. He gets a ton of ground balls. So and doesn't get a whole lot of strikeouts. I mean, he doesn't really hurt you in that category, but I think he struck out a little under a batter per inning last year. So not going to be able to make up for it as much in that regard. Struggled down the stretch as he kind of stretched out that workload. Has had a shoulder issue this spring already. Seems like he's going to be okay, but you never want to hear, especially a guy who built up a higher workload than we're used to seeing and struggled down the stretch, and then he comes into camp with a shoulder issue. Not ideal. I'll just go ahead and rattle off another guy too, Kyle Wright. And Tony Gonsolin's another guy I wanted to mention. He had 16 wins in just 24 starts last year and 100. He never threw 100 pitches in a single outing last year. Dodgers just super careful with his workload. And the injury history is a major reason why. I think he's dealt with shoulder issues. And I think kind of going under the radar a little bit is that the Dodgers are going to be really good again, but I think they've fallen back to the pack as far as they're going to be one of the better teams in the National League still, I think, but they're not going to win 100 games again. And a guy who has had injury issues in the past and doesn't pitch deep into games. I mean, Tony Gonsolin went 16-1 last year. You could easily see him falling back to like 10 or 11 wins. So that's a guy who, might not give you what you're ultimately looking for in the wins department.
Yeah, sticking with the Dodgers, Dustin May almost straddles the line here between I really want him, but probably avoid if we're talking just wins, which again, this is a weird format to discuss some guys. I love this stuff with May, obviously, but how much is he going to pitch past the fifth inning or so after all the injuries? Like, what did he make just 6 major league appearances in 2022? And there's a possibility that May could get some work out of the bullpen for a stretch as the Dodgers want to quell his workload. That's just something to keep in mind with him. I love the pitcher, not totally sold on the situation for wins, which again, it seems silly when you're talking about the Dodgers. They have the highest over under win total at 96, the highest of all 30 major league teams, but they get their wins in a lot of different ways. They can rely on their bullpen. They can get 4 innings out of May early on and then pull him or 5. And maybe he gets stretched out to where he's pitching 6 or 7 at some point. But again, they're going to have to think about the overall workload with him. And they have the arms to get by with not using him as like a traditional starter. Beyond the obvious, like Urias and maybe even Clayton Kershaw for wins, I just wonder how this all plays out at the back end with that rotation. Noah Syndergaard, maybe he's somebody the Dodgers could try to stretch out, but can he handle it? I don't know. The reports on Syndergaard have been pretty good this spring. Again, it could just be early camp fodder, but we'll find out.
Yeah, it's interesting with May. You bring up what they could do, maybe move him to the bullpen. You remember what they did it routinely with Kenta Maeda? Like you had to worry about that with fantasy wise.
Mm-hmm.
Like he would be in the middle of an awesome year, but the Dodgers, because by August 1st, all they're thinking about is the postseason. So they make moves just thinking about that and not about fantasy owners. How dare they? May could be the new Kenta Maeda in that regard.
What do you think? What do you think on Maeda this year? I mean, he's 17 months removed from Tommy John surgery, I believe.
Yeah, it sounds like they're going to stick with a 5-man rotation, it sounds like. And, he's never been a guy who's provided a ton of bulk. But I don't know that they're going to have strict workload restrictions on him. I really liked him as a kind of guy who's routinely underrated prior to the elbow surgery. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they let him go to, 170, 180 innings.
I've got some quick hitter guys. These are pretty obvious, but Freddie Peralta, can his health hold up? Obviously, the strikeouts are going to be massive when he's active, but a really tough guy to bank on in terms of workload. And then, of course, that leads to wins. Hopefully he can be a 7-inning starter again for the Brewers, but I'm gonna wait to want to see that first. At least he's not going as early as he was this time last year. Nick Lodolo, I'll throw out too. Awesome arsenal, love the pitcher, but the Reds are so bad, dude. That. I don't know. They've got some intrigue in the rotation with all those guys, but I would not trust that lineup to be generating very many leads as the season rolls along. Blake Snell, we talked about. Obviously, the Padres are very stacked, but not a guy who is really capable of working too deep. He did for times last year, but generally, I think the Padres, like we talked about, could try for a 6-man rotation and try to use Snell in the best possible way, which is oftentimes just quick bursts of 4 2/3, 5 innings. Again, it's a tricky thing dogging good pitchers because they're not set up for wins, but we're all in this together. I'll send the RotoWire crew and the listeners. We get that wins are not perfect, and it's not something you necessarily target on draft day. It's something that you build in to the overall profile.
Yeah. Speaking of pitchers that you actually kind of like, but I think could be disappointing a little bit in the wins department, I'll throw out one more as we kind of wrap up here. Framber Valdez had 17 wins last season. I think he's another guy who could be impacted by the shift ban, and he's kind of the preeminent ground ball pitcher. Doesn't get a ton of strikeouts, and he kind of 16% percentile in exit velocity and 18% hard hit rate. He's allowing a lot of hard contact and kind of got a little lucky in that regard. His control was fine last year, but it's kind of not been great in the past. Can he keep that up again? He had about a 100-inning jump from the year prior as far as his workload goes. We've seen, especially when pitchers pitch deep into the postseason, especially at the beginning of the following year, they can get off to slow starts. I could see Framber Valdez being a perfectly solid fantasy option still, but maybe be a disappointment all around, and particularly with the wins category.
All right, I like this. It's a weird format for the show. Again, just trying to zero in on pitcher wins, but it was just a reason to talk about some dudes, right?
Right.
As we do a little draft prep here, that'll be it for this show. Thank you for tuning into the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you again by Underdog Fantasy and Fantrax. Hopefully, we shed some light on ways to attack the dreaded pitcher win category. If not, yell at us on Twitter. I'm at Drew Silva. Ryan is at Ryan P. Boyer. Stay tuned for more episodes. We've got one every day of the week now here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Peace out.